You're standing in front of your bathroom mirror, shirt lifted, examining the soft accumulation around your midsection that refuses to respond to anything you have tried. You have counted calories, you have restricted portions, you have exercised with consistency that should have produced visible results by now. The fat on your arms has decreased, your face looks leaner, but this stubborn ring around your middle, this soft layer that hangs over your waistband and rounds your silhouette, seems impervious to your efforts. It mocks your discipline. It suggests that something about your body is broken, that normal rules do not apply to you, that this particular fat is somehow different. Your intuition is correct. This fat is different, not in a way that makes you defective or exempt from progress, but in a way that explains why the strategies working elsewhere on your body have failed here. Belly fat operates by distinct rules. It responds to specific signals. It accumulates for particular reasons that have nothing to do with willpower and everything to do with hormones and metabolism and the ancient survival programming still running in your cells. Understanding these rules changes everything. Once you know why belly fat accumulates and what signals tell the body to store it there, you can stop fighting blindly and start addressing the actual mechanisms involved. This is not about working harder. It is about working in alignment with how your body actually functions, supporting the processes that release abdominal fat rather than inadvertently triggering the processes that cause more of it to accumulate. Let me explain what makes belly fat different, what drives its accumulation, and the evidence-based strategies that target it specifically rather than just reducing body fat in general. These are not extreme interventions requiring superhuman discipline. They are adjustments that work with your biology rather than against it, producing results that calorie restriction alone cannot achieve. Fat is not a uniform substance distributed randomly across your body. Different fat deposits serve different functions, respond to different hormonal signals, and behave differently when you try to reduce them. The fat on your thighs and hips has distinct characteristics from the fat under your chin, which differs from the fat around your internal organs, which differs from the subcutaneous fat on your belly. Treating all fat as identical and expecting uniform results from any intervention misses how the system actually works. Belly fat, particularly the fat that accumulates deep within your abdominal cavity around your organs, is metabolically active tissue that influences your health in ways that fat elsewhere does not. This visceral fat secretes inflammatory compounds. It affects hormone signaling throughout your body. It correlates with cardiovascular risk, diabetes risk, and overall mortality more strongly than total body fat. The belly fat you see when you lift your shirt is partly subcutaneous fat sitting beneath your skin, but it is also partly the reflection of deeper visceral fat pushing your abdominal wall outward. The accumulation of fat in this region specifically tells you something about what is happening hormonally in your body. Fat does not randomly choose where to deposit itself. It follows hormonal instructions. When certain hormones dominate, fat preferentially accumulates in certain locations. The belly is the preferred storage site for fat accumulation driven by one hormone in particular, a hormone that modern life elevates chronically in most people: cortisol, the primary stress hormone. Cortisol is not inherently bad. It is essential for survival, for waking up in the morning, for responding to challenges, for mobilizing energy when you need it. The problem is not cortisol itself, but the pattern of cortisol exposure that modern life creates. Chronically elevated cortisol, cortisol that rises without falling, cortisol that persists when it should have subsided, sends signals to your body that promote abdominal fat storage regardless of how disciplined your diet might be. Understanding this connection reframes the problem. If your belly fat is largely driven by cortisol patterns, then dietary restriction alone cannot solve it. You can create a caloric deficit, and you might lose fat from other areas, but the hormonal signals telling your body to preferentially store abdominal fat remain active. You lose weight from your face, your arms, your legs, while your midsection remains stubbornly unchanged. This is not failure of effort. This is the predictable result of addressing calories without addressing the hormonal driver. Cortisol follows a natural daily rhythm that has important implications for how you structure your activities. In healthy patterns, cortisol rises sharply upon waking, reaches its peak within the first hour of the day, then gradually declines through the afternoon and evening, reaching its lowest levels during sleep. This pattern is called the cortisol awakening response, and it evolved to prepare your body for the demands of the day ahead. The morning cortisol spike is supposed to mobilize energy. It releases glucose into your bloodstream. It prepares your muscles for action. It sharpens your mind for the challenges ahead. This is energy being made available for use. The question is whether that energy gets used or whether it circulates without purpose and eventually contributes to fat storage. When you wake up and immediately enter a sedentary state sitting at breakfast, commuting in a car, sitting at a desk, the energy that cortisol mobilized has nowhere to go. It was released in anticipation of physical activity that never comes. The glucose circulates, triggers insulin release, and if not burned through movement, gets converted to storage. Some of that storage happens in the belly region, which has dense cortisol receptors that respond to the hormone's presence. Morning physical activity, aligned with the natural cortisol peak, changes this equation dramatically. The energy that cortisol mobilized gets used for its intended purpose. Blood sugar is burned through muscle contraction rather than processed into storage. The cortisol itself is metabolized more efficiently when matched with the physical activity it was meant to support. You're not fighting your hormonal rhythm. You're completing the circuit that evolution designed. This does not require intense exercise at dawn. It requires movement that matches the energy cortisol provides. A brisk walk after waking, some stretching or yoga, a workout if that suits your lifestyle. The intensity matters less than the timing. Using your body during the period when cortisol has prepared it for use prevents the mismatch between energy mobilization and energy expenditure that contributes to belly fat accumulation. The principle extends beyond the morning cortisol spike to any stress response throughout your day. Whenever you experience stress, whether from a difficult meeting, a traffic jam, an argument, or a looming deadline, cortisol releases to help you respond. In ancestral conditions, stress meant physical threat. The appropriate response was physical, fighting or fleeing. The cortisol-mobilized energy would have been burned through intense physical action. Modern stress rarely requires physical response. You experience the cortisol surge while sitting still, then continue sitting still as the stress resolves or persists. The energy that was supposed to fuel physical action becomes energy without a destination. It circulates, affects blood sugar regulation, and contributes to storage patterns that favor the abdomen. Moving after stressful events, even briefly, helps complete the stress response cycle that your biology expects. A short walk after a difficult phone call, some stretching after a tense meeting, any physical activity that gives the mobilized energy somewhere to go. This practice is not about burning significant calories, it is about signaling to your body that the stress response has been completed, that the physical action the cortisol prepared you for has occurred, that the mobilization phase can transition to recovery rather than storage. People who instinctively pace when stressed, who need to walk to process difficult emotions, who feel compelled to move after receiving bad news, are following a biological wisdom that sedentary habits have suppressed in most people. Relearning to move in response to stress supports the hormonal patterns that prevent belly fat accumulation. Sitting with stress, absorbing it without physical response, maintains the hormonal patterns that promote it. The structure of your entire day affects cortisol patterns and, by extension, belly fat accumulation. If you save difficult tasks for late in the day, you're triggering cortisol spikes during periods when cortisol should be declining toward its nighttime low. If you exercise intensely in the evening, you're elevating stress hormones when they should be falling. If you work on stressful projects late into the night, you're disrupting the hormonal rhythm that allows recovery and restoration during sleep. Structuring your day to align with natural cortisol patterns supports both stress management and body composition. Demanding tasks, including exercise, belong earlier in the day when cortisol is naturally higher and physical activity completes the energy cycle appropriately. The afternoon and evening should transition toward less demanding activities, toward recovery, toward the preparation for sleep that requires cortisol to fall. This does not mean you cannot exercise in the afternoon or must complete all demanding work before noon. These are patterns to move toward rather than rigid rules to enforce. But recognizing that evening stress and late-night cortisol spikes have different metabolic consequences than morning stress and early-day cortisol peaks allows you to make choices that support your goals. When possible, front-load the demands. When the day allows, let the evening be for recovery. The cumulative effect of these choices shapes the hormonal environment in which belly fat either accumulates or releases. Beyond daily cortisol patterns, the timing of food intake affects how your body handles stored fat, including the stubborn abdominal deposits that resist general weight loss. Extended periods without food, longer fasting windows than most people typically experience, can shift the body into metabolic states that access fat stores more aggressively. The research on fasting and abdominal fat shows patterns worth understanding. When fasting extends beyond the duration where glycogen stores are depleted, the body increasingly relies on fat oxidation for fuel. The longer the fast, the more thoroughly the body must access stored fat to meet energy needs. Some research suggests that belly fat, including visceral fat, responds particularly well to these extended fasting periods, perhaps because the metabolic state achieved during longer fasts overcomes the usual resistance of this stubborn fat depot. A pattern that has shown promise involves occasional extended fasts interspersed among shorter daily fasting windows. You might practice daily time-restricted eating with a 16-hour fast most days, then occasionally extend to 24 hours or beyond when circumstances allow. The occasional longer fast provides the deeper metabolic access that daily fasting may not achieve, while the daily practice maintains the overall fasting lifestyle that supports metabolic health. The emphasis here must be on occasional rather than constant. Extended fasting is a tool to use strategically, not a permanent lifestyle. Constant severe restriction leads to metabolic adaptation, muscle loss, and hormonal disruption that ultimately work against your goals. What works is the combination of consistent moderate fasting with occasional deeper fasts, mimicking the variable food availability that characterized human existence for most of our evolutionary history. Sustainability matters more than extremity for long-term results. A moderate fasting practice you can maintain indefinitely produces better outcomes than an aggressive protocol you abandon after weeks. The belly fat you want to lose accumulated over years. It will release over months. The approach that produces lasting change is one you can sustain long enough for that release to occur, not one that burns you out before meaningful progress happens. This brings me to the importance of building a fasting lifestyle rather than following a fasting protocol. Protocols are rigid. Lifestyles are flexible. Protocols have precise rules that feel like success or failure. Lifestyles have principles that adapt to circumstances while maintaining general direction. The people who succeed long-term with fasting are those who have integrated it into their lives as a sustainable practice, not those who followed an extreme protocol with perfect compliance for a limited period. A fasting lifestyle includes variation. Some days you fast longer, some days shorter, some days not at all. This variation prevents the metabolic adaptation that occurs when the body learns to expect exactly the same pattern every day. It maintains the metabolic flexibility that allows your body to switch efficiently between burning food and burning stored fat. It keeps your system responsive rather than adapted to a rigid routine it has fully anticipated. The two major types of body fat I mentioned earlier have different characteristics that affect how they respond to these interventions. Visceral fat, the fat deposited around your internal organs within the abdominal cavity, is metabolically active but also more responsive to intervention. It releases more readily when you fast, when you exercise, when you reduce insulin levels through dietary changes. Subcutaneous fat, the fat directly under your skin that you can pinch between your fingers, is more stubborn, releasing more slowly and requiring longer intervention to reduce significantly. When you begin addressing belly fat through the strategies I'm describing, the visceral fat often responds first. You might notice changes in how you feel, in inflammatory markers if you test them, in blood sugar control, before you notice dramatic visual changes in your midsection. The deeper fat is releasing even though the superficial fat remains visible. This is progress even when it is not immediately apparent in the mirror. The subcutaneous fat takes longer and requires sustained effort. This is where patience and consistency become essential. The visual transformation you want requires depleting fat stores that your body is designed to protect, that serve as reserves against future scarcity. Your body does not release these stores easily or quickly. It requires sustained signaling, through fasting, through movement, through cortisol management, that convinces your biology that releasing these reserves is safe and appropriate. Cold exposure has emerged as another tool that may support belly fat reduction through mechanisms distinct from diet and exercise. When you are exposed to cold temperatures, your body must generate heat to maintain core temperature. This heat generation requires energy. Some of that energy comes from activating a particular type of fat tissue called brown fat, which burns calories to produce heat rather than storing them. Brown fat is metabolically active fat that humans retain from infancy, when heat generation was critical for survival. Adults have less brown fat than infants, but cold exposure appears to activate and possibly increase brown fat activity even in adults. The thermogenic effect of this activation burns calories, and some research suggests it may particularly affect abdominal fat stores by increasing overall fat oxidation and metabolic rate. Cold exposure does not require extreme measures. Cold showers, brief immersion in cold water, spending time in cool environments without excessive insulation, even reducing indoor heating during winter months, all provide stimulus that may activate these beneficial effects. The exposure needs to be uncomfortable enough to trigger a thermogenic response, but not so extreme as to be dangerous. Brief cold at the end of showers, a few minutes in a cold bath, time outdoors in cool weather dressed more lightly than comfort alone would suggest, these practices can accumulate into meaningful metabolic stimulus over time. The combination of multiple strategies produces results that exceed what any single strategy achieves alone. Morning movement that completes the cortisol awakening response. Physical activity after stressful events that processes stress hormones appropriately. Daily structure that aligns demanding activities with natural cortisol rhythms. Regular fasting practice with occasional extended fasts that access stubborn fat stores. Variation in fasting length that maintains metabolic flexibility. Cold exposure that activates thermogenic fat burning. Each element contributes something. Together they create an environment where belly fat release becomes not just possible but likely. None of these strategies requires extreme measures. None demands suffering or deprivation or superhuman discipline. Each involves adjusting patterns in ways that align with human biology rather than fighting against it. You're not overriding your body's programming. You're using that programming correctly, sending the signals it evolved to respond to, creating the conditions under which it does what you want, rather than what modern mismatch makes it do. I want to address the psychological dimension of belly fat because how you think about it affects how effectively you address it. Self-criticism about body fat is not only emotionally harmful, but practically counterproductive. Stress contributes to belly fat accumulation. Harsh self-judgment is a form of chronic stress. Berating yourself about your midsection literally contributes to the problem you are berating yourself about. Your body stores fat for survival purposes. It is not betraying you or failing you. It is doing exactly what evolution designed it to do. Store energy against future scarcity, protect vital organs, prepare for challenges ahead. The fat around your middle is your body trying to keep you alive under conditions it perceives as requiring reserves. The perception may be inaccurate given modern food availability, but the intention is protective. Approaching fat loss from this perspective changes your relationship with your body. You're not fighting an enemy. You're communicating with a system that has your best interests at heart, but is operating on outdated information. You're sending signals, through movement, through fasting, through stress management, that circumstances have changed, that the reserves are no longer needed, that releasing stored energy is safe and appropriate. This gentler approach produces better results than harsh discipline because it reduces the stress that contributes to the problem. You stop adding cortisol through self-criticism while addressing cortisol through the other strategies I have described. The overall hormonal environment shifts toward one that supports release rather than accumulation. You accomplish more by fighting less. The science behind what I have described is substantial, though I should note that scientific understanding continues to evolve. The cortisol belly fat connection is well established. The benefits of fasting for metabolic health are supported by considerable research. The role of brown fat and cold exposure, while less thoroughly studied, shows promising signals. The general principle that working with biological rhythms produces better outcomes than ignoring them is increasingly supported by evidence across many domains. What science cannot tell you is exactly which combination of these strategies will work best for you specifically. Individual responses vary based on genetics, history, current hormonal status, stress levels, and countless other factors. The strategies I have described provide a framework, but the specific implementation that produces your best results will be discovered through experimentation and observation. Start with the elements that feel most accessible and build from there. If morning movement is possible in your current routine, begin there. If extending your fasting window occasionally feels manageable, try it. If cold exposure interests you, experiment with it. Observe what produces changes in your energy, your measurements, your visual appearance over time. Adjust based on what you learn. This is not about following a prescription perfectly. It is about discovering what your body responds to and doing more of that. The fastest way to lose belly fat is not a single hack or trick or secret. It is the combination of strategies that address the actual mechanisms driving abdominal fat accumulation. Cortisol management through aligned movement and stress processing, daily structure that respects natural hormonal rhythms, fasting practices that access stubborn fat stores while maintaining metabolic flexibility, cold exposure that activates thermogenic pathways, psychological approaches that reduce stress rather than adding to it. These elements work together synergistically. The fasting becomes more effective when cortisol is managed. The movement becomes more productive when timed with hormonal rhythms. The cold exposure adds a thermogenic element that enhances overall fat burning. The mindset shift reduces the stress contribution that would otherwise undermine the other efforts. No single element is sufficient, but together they create conditions where belly fat release accelerates. The timeline for results depends on how much belly fat you're starting with, how consistently you implement these strategies, and how your individual biology responds. Some people see changes within weeks. Others require months of sustained effort. The fat that accumulated over years will not disappear in days. What you can expect is gradual, consistent progress if you maintain the practices that support release. The visual changes often lag behind the metabolic changes. Internal visceral fat may release before you notice your waistline shrinking. Inflammatory markers may improve before the mirror shows dramatic difference. If you measure only by appearance, you may become discouraged before the appearance has time to catch up with the internal improvements. Patience requires trust that the process is working even when immediate evidence is subtle. What I can promise is that the strategies I have described address the actual mechanisms involved in belly fat accumulation. They are not arbitrary. They are not based on wishful thinking or marketing claims. They emerge from understanding what causes belly fat and intervening at those causal points. If you implement them consistently, your body has no choice but to respond. The laws of physiology apply to you as they apply to everyone. Creating the conditions for release produces release, even if the timing varies individually. Your belly fat is not permanent. It is not a sentence you must accept. It is stored energy being held by a body that believes it might be needed. Change what your body believes through the signals you send, and what it holds will be released. The strategies exist. The mechanisms are understood. The application awaits only your decision to begin. That decision does not require perfection. It requires direction. Start sending different signals today. Move after waking. Process stress through physical activity. Extend your fasting window occasionally. Consider cold exposure. Align your day with your biology rather than against it. Do these things imperfectly but consistently, and watch what happens to the fat that seemed immovable. The mirror that showed you stubborn resistance will show you gradual change. The waistband that felt tight will feel comfortable, then loose. The midsection that refused to respond to calories and willpower will respond to strategies that address why it accumulated in the first place. The fastest way to lose belly fat is to stop fighting blindly and start working with the biology that determines where fat goes and when it leaves. You now know what that biology requires. What remains is implementation, sustained over time, producing results that frustration and restriction alone could never achieve. The belly fat has an explanation. The explanation points to solutions. The solutions are available to you today. The only question is whether you will apply them long enough to see what your body is capable of when you finally give it what it needs.